It's a special edition of our program, a Christmas story of a different sort. It involves a major news story of the previous Arkansas century, a tale for the decades. It centers on a system that offered little cheer in any season, except perhaps for a very few. The prison reforms that took root 50 years ago and the two men who helped launch them. Arkansas Week coming up.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. The scandal that for a century was the Arkansas prison system began to emerge, its parameters anyway, in the mid-1960s. The reform movement started building serious momentum in the administration of Governor Winthrop Rockefeller, beginning in 1967. It quickly moved to federal court. 50 years ago this month, Judge J. Smith Henley summoned two youngish attorneys to his chambers and offered them what he termed a Christmas present. They would inspect, investigate the state's two prisons, Cummins and Tucker, be the court's fact finders, eyes and ears. Jack Holt Jr. was the son and nephew of prominent Arkansas judicial and political figures, an established criminal defense attorney, and would later become Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court. Phil Kaplan, originally of Massachusetts, had settled in Little Rock only a few years before, but already was known for his expertise in civil liberties law. The two attorneys toured the prison units, interviewing inmates and staff. Holt documenting what they found with an 8mm home movie camera. What they found confirmed what the inmates had long suffered in near silence, conditions that would shame any civilized society: malfunctioning toilets, hazardous wiring, leaking roofs, soiled bedding. Weeks of hearings followed in court, the plaintiffs arguing the prison system was fundamentally flawed, top to bottom. Inmate nutrition, a bizarre, cruel joke. Younger, weaker prisoners were at the mercy of the older and stronger. Drugs, alcohol, weapons, all available at a cost. At the core of the prison's malfunction was the trustee system, inmates guarding other inmates. Now, the trustee system meant fewer paid free world personnel, a savings to taxpayers, it was argued. But the price was high. Testimony revealed the extent of the abuse, the extortion, and the bribery the system enabled. Fewer than 5 weeks after assigning Holt and Kaplan their mission, Judge Henley had heard and seen enough. The Arkansas prison system, he declared, was a dark and evil world, and he declared it unconstitutional. An essential function of state government would remain under federal court supervision for years to come. Holt and Kaplan would remain on the case, and now, 50 years later, they join us here. Justice Holt, Phil Kaplan, thanks very much for being with us.
Our pleasure.
A half century. Do you remember when you went down there the first time? When you entered that dark and evil world?
Oh, Judge Henley? Quite well.
Jack, Judge Holt?
Well, initially we gathered and met each other. We'd never met each other before. And
you and Phil Kaplan?
Right. And Phil and I met at the Sampac Hotel across from the federal building, assuming we were going to be in the federal building quite a bit. That'd be a good place to meet. And I would say we formed a perfect union together, working together. And shortly after that first of the year, we were on the road down to Cummins Unit to look over the situation, beginning our interviews, etc. I might add that Judge Henley told us at the time that this would be uncompensated, which we understood on the front end. Well, anyway, the first couple of times we went down, part of the problem was getting to the penitentiary. We went through Pine Bluff. At that time, Pine Bluff was a railroad town, and we'd always get in to traffic between trains that stopped on the track. And so after 2 or 3 excuse me, trips down, I found that there was a small landing strip there, and I went to see Judge Henley about transporting back and forth by air, not knowing that we were not funded at all, expenses, whatever. Right. So anyway, I asked Judge Henley, I said, you know, really, we can get down there in 20 minutes, Judge, rather than 2 hours and 2 hours waiting, coming back with the trains. And he said, well, Jack, I forgot to tell you, there's no expense there. I think it would be wise for y'all to get down the best way you can and the cheapest way. Well, that phased out, and I've had an interest in a small airplane then. We did fly down some, but finding that we were unfunded and the threat of flying in the air, we canceled that, and we just resigned ourselves to the slow travel down and back.
Character building exercise.
Right,
in other
right.
words.
I recall that the first time we went down, pardon me, the first time we went down, we asked to see, at that time, Bob Sarver, who was the head of the ADC at that time, and he wasn't around.
Department of Correction.
Department of Corrections. And he was in Gould buying propane. It was, you know, it was cold. It was the middle of winter. He was buying propane for the guard towers because they didn't have any heat in those guard towers. I also was shocked to learn that the only weapons at the prison were handled by inmates, by the trustees. They had rifles, and they were in those guard towers freezing until Bob Sarver came back after having paid for it out of his own pocket. There wasn't any money to pay for the propane to heat those guard towers. And then he took us around and toured us around, at least a brief tour. And one of the things I'll never forget is the odor, the smell. It wasn't that it was so noxious, but it permeated everything. It was a very unpleasant odor. Never forgot that. And of course, at Cummins, just the only housing was in open barracks. And so we saw the barracks, and you just saw some of the toilet facilities, but it was terrible. I mean, it was just awful. They were rigidly segregated, black barracks and white barracks, and the only protection were from trustees, and so there was a great deal of brutality in those barracks. It was an eye-opening experience.
I just wondered, gentlemen, how long, now Judge Henley the year before, I think, or maybe 2 years before, he had issued a first injunction regarding corporal punishment there. Only after you two intervened or reported to the judge did he eventually declare the entire system unconstitutional. Right. Upon your first visits there, so I mean, you had a clue that things were terribly, put gently, amiss in the Arkansas Department of Correction prison system. How long did it take you to get a sense that the entire thing was rotten from top to bottom?
Not very long. We looked at what was called a trustee system and how it was managed. And, well, in the first place, looking at the barracks itself, I think they were certified for, 70 or 80 people, yeah. And there was 140 people crammed in these barracks, and the beds were stacked on top of each other, and the air was stale, to say the least. The heating and air, well, it wasn't the air. The air was opening windows, but and as Phil mentioned, that there was a certain odor about the whole place that spoke for itself.
Judge Henley gave us, or told us, I now have over 20, Jack remembers it as being 23, he's probably right, I think he is right about it, writs. Inmates wrote writs, still do write writs. So he had this collection of writs which he turned over to us, describing some of those conditions. So Judge Henley was primed. He was already primed. He had seen the Tucker telephone. He knew about the strap. As a matter of fact, Jack, you'll recall, when we went in his chambers, he had that strap hanging on a coat rack. This large, I guess it was 6 or 8 inches wide, 6 feet long, the strap that was used to inflict corporal punishment.
Hard leather with a big handle.
With a handle
for
on
viewers who aren't of a certain age.
So Judge, after hearing those cases, after reading the writs, he was primed and knew that there was something awful that had been going on, that was going on. And the state owes a great deal, not so much to Jack and to me, because we were really just tools to bring it in front of Judge Henley. But what an amazing thing that he did. The first judge to declare a whole prison system unconstitutional. And that was a dramatic, wonderful undertaking on his part. And here's this judge who was an appointee of President Eisenhower from up in Boone County, from Harrison, and made certain that there would be a change from that day forward. A remarkable individual. So, and to carry the writs forward, I knew at the time a lawyer named Bill Turner at the Legal Defense Fund in New York. That's the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And he had had some experience with prison litigation. His aunt was Aileen Turner, who was the Chancery clerk here in Pulaski County. So he had some connection with Arkansas. I sent it to him. He made a suggestion that we file an amended complaint, and what we did was we filed what was called, I think, an amended, consolidated, substituted complaint,
Right.
which then became the basis of the hearings that went forward, and combined all of the allegations in those writs.
Judge Holt, just shortly after Judge Henley, we have a clip here. This is you in 1970, shortly after Judge Henley issued his ruling.
We know that the system we have had in the past has not worked at all. In fact, we see recidivism at an 80% rate. We see increase in crime of the same person who's been in the penitentiary. So common sense should tell us that the old system of punishment, retribution, of a living hell on earth, you might say, has not rehabilitated.
1970, Your Honor. Well, so there's some contrast here. In 1969, the Arkansas prison system had typically fewer than 1,300 inmates, men and women, very comparatively few number of women, fewer than 1,300. Today it has, under direct supervision of the Arkansas Department of Corrections, 17,730. It had fewer than 200 free world employees in 1969. Today it has approximately 6,000. The prison system in not 69, but 67, but I think these numbers are contemporaneous. The budget for the Arkansas Department of the prison system was $1.8 million. But owing to the farming operation there, it made that money back and turned a $219,000, quote, profit to the taxpayers, made it very politically appealing. Today, the Arkansas Department of Correction and the Department of Community Correction together will spend in one fiscal year approximately $520 million. Reform is expensive, but so is incarceration, period.
Well, the prison population kept growing even during the time that Jack and I were handling the matter. At that time, there were zero programs. The only program was stoop labor, farming, chopping cotton, whatever existed out in the field. So when you add the industries and you add 16,000 people approximately, you obviously add a tremendous burden, and that's why I think, correctly so, at least some members of the legislature and the governor are looking at alternatives to incarceration. I will say that when we were there and Bob Sarver was the head of the system, he was our best witness that first round of court proceedings, because he was able to describe exactly how difficult it was to be able to manage a system with no resources. He was able to describe in detail all of the evils that the judge pointed to, and when we put the inmates on, those inmates were able firsthand to validate what Sarver was saying.
He was not a hostile witness, Mr.
No.
Sarver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the problem was the inmates were running
The
the
joint.
penitentiary.
That's exactly what happened.
They were in total control. I say the inmates, the trustee inmates were. And not only they had the guard towers, but they controlled if a lineman needed to see a doctor or something, they had to go through a trustee.
Well, they kept the books. They did the paperwork.
They did it all.
They
did it
Did
all.
it all.
Yeah.
And use the armed guards were all primarily inmates of a nature that would be willing to shoot another inmate. Those were your armed guards. And the controls ran on down to the men with the long rifles, on down to the floor walkers, who were maybe half. Well, you had your trustee, and then you had what you called your half trustee. Mm-hmm. And the difference was trustees had nice clean uniforms, khaki, whereas the rank people had rags and worn out shoes. So you could go to any aspect of life nearly as to resident purposes, crowded situations there, inability to get to medical attention because you had to go through a floor walker and a trustee. How'd you get that done? Sometimes do favors for it. Quid pro quo, you might say. But the whole thing just ran from top to bottom, except for the few free world people like Bob Sarver. And like I say, Sarver was a key witness. And at that time, and up until that time, it was kind of accepted among the state capitol people that, hey, you know, we got a prison system that's self-sustaining.
Yeah, we bragged about it.
Brag about it, yeah.
It made us money.
Well, then when Sarver came in, that interrupted the program. And I found later that through a friend that Sarver was there till Dale Bumpers came on board. And
As governor, right?
right, and I found out not too long ago, I couldn't understand why Dale would fire Sarver. Because he was the reformist, he was a humanitarian, but he was a tough guy to run the system. Well, it was the legislature. Actually, he had to make a decision, and the legislature, in essence, I guess, told the governor, you're not going to get anything unless you get rid of this guy, Sarver. I mean, he's bad. He's calling for money out of our treasury. And so we lost Sarver.
We did, and what we gained, it was hardly described as a gain.
Yeah, I was
we
going to
would,
say.
we wouldn't describe it as a gain. We got the Texas people.
Yeah.
We got Terrell Don Hutto and Art Lockhart, who came up from the George Beto system in Texas. And if there was a system that was worse than ours and more cruel than ours, it was the Texas system under George Beto. And there are probably more cases in federal court against the Texas system than even the Arkansas system by a huge amount. And when this is another vivid recollection in my mind, the first hearing after Dale Bumpers became governor, he had a new staff of lawyers. He did not want the AG's office. Henry Ginger was the lawyer, you recall, who was handling the case for the Attorney General's office. Well, we were in court, and we discovered that there were now private attorneys who were representing the state.
Phil, I'm going to take the extraordinary step of interrupting
That's
you
okay.
to say we are out of time, but I'm going to ask both gentlemen to stand by here. We're going to continue this conversation on our web version of the program, which the viewer is certainly encouraged to do. A lot of fascinating history here. This is this year's last edition of Arkansas Week in its usual format. Our next broadcast will be our customary year-end conversation with Senator John Bozeman. Senator Tom Cotton unable to join us. And we close the program as we do at this time every year by remembering the men and women who've left the stage in the past 12 months. They're the individuals who made news, some of them even before there was an Arkansas Week. Others helped us cover the news. All of them helped shape the Arkansas we know. Our wish for you is a joyous and safe holiday and a very happy New Year.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.